They took 9-year-old Ella from her own yard and dumped her on the side of a highway, all under the guise of HOA rules. HOA president Harry Landum thought he could play police right up until a terrified child was left alone in the desert. But her father, a former FEMA systems expert, had the skills and the evidence to turn the tables. And just wait until you see how this nightmare unraveled. And why justice in the end hit back hard. Travis Pearson had lived in the same quiet neighborhood in Colorado Springs for nearly 12 years. He mowed his lawn every Saturday, fixed his own sprinklers, paid his taxes on time, and knew every crack in his driveway by heart. He was a systems engineer, logical, methodical, the kind of man who triple checks the locks before bed and runs monthly backups of his home security footage. He wasn't the kind of man who panicked easily. But that night, everything in him broke. It started with a sentence no parent ever wants to say out loud. "I can't find my daughter." 9-year-old Ella had asked to play outside after dinner, just a few minutes on the swing in the backyard before homework. Travis had agreed. The sun was still up. There was nothing unusual about it. She wore her favorite blue pajama set, still smelling like bubble bath, her long hair tied back in a loose ponytail. He was washing dishes when he realized the swing had gone silent. No creak, no giggles, just stillness. He opened the back door. The swing was moving slightly, like someone had jumped off in a hurry. No Ella. He walked around the house once, twice, checked the front yard, then the garage, called her name, no answer. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, straight to voicemail. His pulse spiked. He raced to his office, flipped on the monitor linked to their backyard cameras. The screen was black. He stared at it, frozen, then ran outside and saw the cable, cleanly yanked out, no fray, no tear. Just gone. Travis's stomach flipped. It wasn't just that she was missing. It was that someone didn't want him to see how. He called every neighbor he could think of, knocked on doors. No one had seen anything. A few hadn't even known she was outside. One woman across the street mumbled something about those HOA people always driving around, but didn't clarify. At 10:17 p.m., Travis called the police. A missing child report was filed. Officers arrived. They asked if Ella could have run away. Travis snapped. "She's 9. She doesn't even cross the street without asking me." He didn't sleep, couldn't sit, couldn't breathe. Every second stretched like wet tar. Every new hour, another punch to the chest. The police widened the search radius. They brought in a K9. Nothing, no footprints, no tire marks, no sound. And then, 11 hours later, his phone rang. It was just past 6 a.m., a number he didn't recognize. He answered on the first ring. Voice cracked from yelling all night. "Mr. Pearson?" said a woman's voice, quiet, hesitant. "My name is Shelley. I work at a temporary shelter outside Flagstaff. I think we have your daughter." Travis sat down hard, his throat closed. She was found by the highway about 2 hours ago. She was barefoot, in pajamas. She had cuts and bruises on her legs and arms. She kept saying she needed to find her dad. Said she was taken from her home by some people from the HOA. For a moment, Travis couldn't speak. His mind tried to understand the words, but they didn't connect. HOA? The neighborhood board? That was impossible. That made no sense. "I'm sorry," the woman continued. "She said they got mad when she told them you weren't home. Then they drove for a long time and told her to get out." His ears rang. His hands were shaking. Flagstaff was nearly 600 miles from Colorado Springs. They left her on a roadside in the desert, 9 years old. 9. When Travis finally arrived in Arizona, he didn't walk, he ran. He burst through the doors of the shelter like a man crashing through flames. The woman at the front desk barely had time to speak before he spotted Ella in the far corner, sitting small and silent on a faded couch beneath a blanket too large for her shoulders. Her knees were tucked to her chest. Her face, swollen on one side, streaked with dust and dried tears, turned toward him with the kind of expression no child should ever wear, scared, confused, ashamed. He dropped to his knees in front of her so fast the floor shook. His hands hovered, terrified to touch her in case she broke. She looked up, her lips trembling, and whispered one sentence that carved itself into his bones. "Daddy, I told that lady from the HOA you weren't home." Travis froze, his breath caught in his throat. And she said if there's no adult, then I wasn't allowed to stay. So they took me. Her voice cracked on the last word. She paused to swallow, then added barely audible. And when I cried, they got mad, said I was being dramatic, and then they told me to get out, just open the door, and left. She curled tighter into herself, like she was afraid she'd be punished again for even saying it. Something inside Travis snapped, but silently. Not in a scream, not in a fist through the wall. His rage didn't need volume. It filled the room like smoke, thick and choking, coiling behind his eyes as his vision went dim around the edges. He took a deep breath that didn't reach his lungs. His hands shook as he reached for her gently, tucking the blanket tighter around her. "I'm here," he said hoarsely. "You're safe now. No one will ever touch you again." But his mind was already spiraling. The HOA, the Homeowners Association. He had dealt with them before, condescending notes about his grass being an inch too high, complaints about Ella leaving chalk drawings on the driveway, one passive-aggressive letter about excessive noise from backyard laughter. But this wasn't rule enforcement. This wasn't protocol. This was abduction. This was insanity parading as governance. He learned more over the next few hours. While Ella rested, the shelter workers quietly filled him in. Apparently, one of the HOA board members had visited the house for a routine welfare check, citing concerns from the neighborhood. No one had called the police, no CPS, just the HOA. When Ella answered the door alone, they decided the situation constituted a violation, so they took her. No signature, no warrant, no consent, just took her. Travis could hardly process it. These weren't child services. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't trained in anything. They were neighbors with too much free time, wearing clipboards like badges, pretending their board meetings gave them power. They had watched his family like hawks, obsessed over garden weeds and wind chimes, nitpicked his parenting from across the street. And now they had taken his daughter and driven her across state lines like some kind of neighborhood militia. When she cried, they punished her for it. His 9-year-old baby, tossed on the side of a desert highway in pajamas and no shoes because she violated some twisted version of order. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was terror in a dress shirt and khakis. It was a suburban nightmare with an HOA letterhead, and it was going to pay. Travis didn't break, not the way most people might have expected, not with screaming or threats or desperate sobbing. Instead, after holding Ella for hours, after making sure she was warm, fed, and asleep with the shelter nurse watching over her like family, he stepped outside into the cool Arizona night, and everything inside him locked into place. A steel door slammed shut somewhere deep inside his chest, and when it did, a different version of him took over. He was no longer just a father. He was a systems architect who had spent 6 years working for the federal government, specifically within a FEMA subunit responsible for developing emergency response protocols for infrastructure breaches. His job had been identifying failures in the system, technical, human, and bureaucratic. He didn't just know how to detect weaknesses. He knew how to trace them, expose them, and dismantle them. And now, someone had made a catastrophic mistake by underestimating him. The first call he made was to a civil rights attorney who specialized in child endangerment cases. He gave her a short version of the facts. She didn't speak for 5 seconds after he finished, then said, "Email me everything you've got, now." The second call went to a local journalist in Colorado Springs who'd once written an expose on corruption in a local housing board. The third went to a national correspondent from a parenting blog that had a reputation for making monsters go viral. After that, he drove straight home, hands steady on the wheel, mind already assembling a timeline. His house was quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. The lawn still uncut, one of the supposed violations. The chalk on the driveway had been hosed off. HOA had been thorough, but not thorough enough. He went into the garage and pulled out a heavy-duty storage bin he hadn't opened in years. Inside were backup routers, server drives, a full secondary home security system he'd installed just in case. It hadn't been connected to the main panel, hadn't broadcast any feeds, but it had been recording. Silent, offline, physical storage only. He spent the next 48 hours in his home office with blackout curtains drawn, monitors glowing, cables strung across the floor like tripwires. He barely slept, barely ate, just worked, line by line, pixel by pixel, scrubbing corrupted feeds, reconstructing fragmented frames. His fingers moved like machines, faster than instinct, every keystroke a step closer to reckoning. On the morning of the second day, he found it. A grainy feed from the side gate camera, time-stamped, real. A woman with a clipboard, HOA jacket. She opened the gate, no knock, no announcement. She walked around the side of the house like she owned it. Then another figure appeared, male, older, bald. Travis recognized him, Harry Landum, president of the HOA board. They whispered something off camera. Then came Ella. She had answered the back door. The woman pointed toward the street. Ella hesitated, then nodded. She followed them. That moment alone tore a hole in Travis's chest, but he kept watching. They walked her through the side yard, past the garage, to a waiting gray minivan parked across the street. No license plates on the front. But the camera caught the rear angle as the door opened. Ella looked back one last time, then disappeared inside. Travis paused the video, then rewound. Frame by frame, he enhanced the plate number. Got it. Then cross-referenced through a private lookup database he'd once helped secure. He had a name, then another, and an address. He stared at the screen, his jaw locked tight. They thought they'd erased it all. They thought wrong. The office of the Mountain Pine Estates HOA was a single-story building with fake stone walls and a polished oak sign out front, pretending to be more official than it was. Travis had driven past it 100 times, never once needing to step inside. But today, as he pushed through the glass double doors, he didn't knock. He didn't pause. He walked in like he owned the air, the floor, the hour. 3 people sat behind a long desk, lined with ferns and binders. 2 men and 1 woman, all of them with name tags and stiff expressions that cracked into forced smiles when they saw him. Mr. Pearson, the woman said, standing slightly, "You're not scheduled for a—" "Spare me," Travis said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut paper. "I'm not here for a meeting. I'm here for an explanation." One of the men, bald, tanned, with a deep crease between his brows, spoke next. Travis recognized him immediately. Harry Landum, the president of the board. "Sir, your property has been in violation of several ordinances for weeks," Harry began, his voice rehearsed, like he was reading from an invisible script. "Excessive noise complaints, landscaping neglect, improper use of outdoor equipment, and there was the concern over—" "Shut up." Travis said it without raising his voice. It landed like a gunshot. The room fell silent. Travis took 1 step forward, then laid a small flash drive on the desk. It looked harmless, almost quaint, but everyone in the room seemed to flinch at the sight of it, as if they already knew. "That," Travis said, "is a copy of the footage I recovered from my house. It shows your people, your board members, unlawfully entering my property. It shows them coercing a minor. It shows them putting my 9-year-old daughter into a vehicle and driving her across state lines." He leaned in slightly. "I've already sent copies to the district attorney's office and the sheriff's department. By tomorrow morning, you'll all be household names." The smiles vanished. Just like that. Replaced by something else. Uncertainty, discomfort, and then, most satisfyingly, fear. Harry opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. Then finally, he spoke in a quiet, uneven voice. We believed there was a safety issue, that the child was unattended. We thought, we were protecting her, that's all. It was a misunderstanding." Travis laughed. It was a bitter, humorless sound. "A misunderstanding?" He slammed both hands on the desk, making the pens jump. "My daughter was left on the side of a highway in another state, in pajamas, with no phone, no food, no adult, in a desert. She had cactus thorns in her knees. You didn't protect her, you kidnapped her." Nobody spoke, not even the woman, who now looked visibly pale. "I've seen the footage," Travis said. "Every second of it. You opened my gate without permission. You crossed onto my land. You took my child without a court order, without notifying the police, without calling me. You acted like you were the law." He pointed at each of them one by one. "You're not police. You're not social workers. You're not trained in anything except writing passive-aggressive letters about law and height. And now, you're criminals." Harry tried again, softer now. "Mr. Pearson, If we overstepped, Travis roared, his composure cracking for just a moment. You could have gotten her killed. His chest heaved once, but he didn't let it show. He swallowed the rage back down, weaponized it. Save it for the judge, he said, backing toward the door. And if I were you, I'd call a lawyer, now. He turned without waiting for a response and walked out. The silence he left behind was louder than any threat. The news broke just after 6 p.m. during the evening broadcast. The segment was only 42 seconds long, but it hit like a lightning strike. Grainy black and white surveillance footage filled the screen, time-stamped, silent, damning. A woman in a jacket marked HOA walked through a private gate without permission. A man followed close behind. They spoke to a little girl on the back porch. She hesitated. Then they gestured. She followed them out of frame. Cut to a still image of a gray minivan. Then the anchor's voice came in, tight with disbelief. This footage, obtained from the home of Colorado Springs resident Travis Pearson, appears to show members of a local homeowners association removing his 9-year-old daughter from the property without consent. The child was later found abandoned in another state. The internet detonated. Within the hour, the clip was on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, stitched again, slowed down, captioned, dissected. The hashtags flooded in. #HOAA kidnapping, #justice for Ella, #they took her. Parents across the country were outraged. Forums lit up. Talk shows rerouted their morning segments. By midnight, the governor of Colorado had made a brief statement. This case will be fully investigated. No one, not even an HOA, stands above the law. But the most seismic blow came the next morning. At 7:14 a.m., the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially announced that it was opening a multi-state case into the unlawful transportation and abandonment of a minor. The term kidnapping was used. The case had crossed state lines. It was now federal, and that was when the members of the HOA board started to disappear. First was Harry Landum, president of the Mountain Pine Estates HOA. He was the man seen in the footage, leading Ella to the van. When authorities arrived at his home to question him, the door was open, the inside stripped down. His car was gone. So was his phone. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him since yesterday morning. Next was Andrew Vail, another board member. Surveillance at a small regional airport in New Mexico picked him up trying to board a private charter flight that would bring him within driving distance of the Mexican border. He was carrying over $15,000 in cash and a burner phone. When federal agents intercepted him, he claimed he was going on a retreat. Finally, there was Mavis Hobbs, the third confirmed participant. She didn't run far. Her brother owned a ranch in rural Utah, and she'd holed up there pretending to be sick. But someone recognized her photo on the local news and tipped off police. By the end of the day, arrest warrants had been issued in 3 states. The sheriff of Greenlee County, Arizona, where Ella had been found, stood in front of cameras that evening and made it official. These individuals are now fugitives, he said plainly. We have active warrants for the arrest of Harry Landum, Andrew Vail, and Mavis Hobbs, on charges including kidnapping, child endangerment, and unlawful detainment of a minor. Let me be clear, this is not about a homeowner's dispute. This is a criminal act, and they will be prosecuted accordingly. The reaction was immediate. Comment sections filled with fury. They need prison, one user wrote. This is what happens when power goes unchecked, said another's. Protesters began showing up at the HOA's closed office, taping missing child posters to the windows with Ella's face printed beside the words, "She was 9. They left her in the desert." The case had shifted. It wasn't local anymore. It wasn't about overgrown grass or swing sets or community regulations. It was national, symbolic, a line in the sand. And for the 3 on the run, this wasn't about fines or citations anymore. They were wanted, officially, publicly, by name. They got Andrew first. He was caught outside a gas station just south of El Paso, trying to buy prepaid phones and a burner laptop with a crumpled envelope of cash. A passing driver recognized his face from a breaking news segment on CNN and made the call. When the police arrived, Andrew was sitting in a rental car with the engine running, sweating through his shirt, hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. His mugshot, taken hours later, showed a man cracked wide open by fear, eyes wide, mouth half-parted like he still hadn't processed that the chase was over. That photo ran on every major outlet before sundown. Mavis was next. She'd stayed holed up in her brother's Utah ranch for days, eating canned food and refusing to answer the door. But neighbors talked, and someone tipped off local law enforcement. Deputies surrounded the property just after dawn. She came out without a fight, hands shaking, muttering something about doing the right thing, and it wasn't supposed to happen like that. Her arrest video was uneventful. No shouting, no struggle. Just the slow, devastating realization that her clipboard and rules weren't going to protect her anymore. But Harry didn't run. 3 days after the FBI press conference, he walked into the sheriff's substation in Colorado Springs just after sunrise. No attorney, no entourage, just him. Shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, hands raised in surrender. The deputy on duty didn't even recognize him at first. It took a full 5 seconds for Harry to speak. "I'm here to turn myself in," he said, voice brittle and uneven. "I didn't mean for it to get out of control. She told me her father wasn't home. I thought she was in danger." The deputy didn't flinch. "You thought you had the right to take someone's child, Harry?" the officer said, pulling the cuffs out slowly. "That's what you thought?" Harry didn't reply, just lowered his eyes and nodded once. Word spread fast. Within hours, footage of him being walked out in handcuffs made its way to every screen in the country. But the real moment, the one that etched itself into the memory of everyone in that courtroom, came a week later during the preliminary hearing. Travis and Ella sat together in the front row. She held a small stuffed bear, the one she'd carried since she was 5. The courtroom was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, but the world seemed to quiet when Harry was brought in, shackled at the wrists, his face pale and sunken. He sat down at the defendant's table and immediately broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears slipping down his cheeks as he hunched forward, head bowed under the weight of his own failure. Ella leaned in closer to her father and whispered, "He's scared," she said softly, not looking away. "He's scared like I was." Travis turned to her, lips parting slightly. He studied her face, so small, so calm, so much older than she should have ever had to be, and felt something shift in his chest, a weight lifting, a full breath returning. He reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Now," he said, his voice low and steady, "he knows what it means to be alone." They didn't celebrate. They didn't smile. There was no fist-pumping moment of victory, just a silence that said everything. Justice wasn't loud. It was still. And in that stillness, a little girl reclaimed a piece of her power, and a man who thought he was above the law finally learned what it meant to be small. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. The evidence was overwhelming. The footage, the expert testimony, the statements from shelter workers, even the forensic GPS data recovered from the HOA's gray minivan, all of it painted a crystal clear picture. The defense didn't stand a chance. And they knew it. Harry Landum, Andrew Vale, and Mavis Hobbs, once smug figureheads of their neighborhood's petty bureaucracy, now sat side by side in courtroom chairs that seemed too large for them. Their lawyers whispered strategies. But the prosecution came in hard and unrelenting. The charges were precise and devastating: kidnapping of a minor, endangerment of a child, criminal conspiracy to unlawfully detain and transport across state lines. Each count carried weight. Each word felt like a brick landing on the table. But there was no drawn-out battle, no endless objections or theatrical breakdowns, just silence, hesitation, and then plea deals. Each of them, one after the other, chose to fold. They accepted the prosecution's terms in exchange for reduced sentencing and the chance to avoid full federal prosecution, which would have carried even heavier consequences. Still, the courtroom didn't soften. Judge Myra Kent, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a gaze that could shatter glass, sat tall behind the bench. She listened carefully to every argument, to every apology, and to every deflection. And when it was time to speak, she made no effort to disguise her contempt. "You acted," she said slowly, her voice cold and clear, "as if you were an authority unto yourselves, as if the rules you wrote on HOA letterhead gave you the right to take justice into your own hands. You entered a private residence without a warrant, removed a child without legal consent, transported her across state lines, and abandoned her in a desert, alone. You could have called the police. You could have contacted child services. You did neither. You were not acting in her best interest. You were acting out of arrogance. Her gavel sat untouched. Her words were all the impact the room needed. You were self-appointed police, violating the civil rights of a family, endangering a child, and destroying what little trust the public has left in institutions like the one you represented. You've turned an administrative body into a vehicle of fear. You've weaponized community authority. She paused, eyes scanning their bowed heads. You do not belong in civil society. The sentences followed quickly after. Harry Landum, as the ringleader and visible face of the operation, was sentenced to 12 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 6. Andrew and Mavis received 8 years each, with additional probation and mandatory child protection rehabilitation programs to follow their release. There was no celebration in the courtroom, just an audible release. A collective exhale from the theatre, the gallery, from the press, from the few community members brave enough to attend. Travis sat in the second row, Ella beside him, her hand in his. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe. Not just a shallow survival breath, a full one. The kind that reached all the way to his gut and didn't stop halfway through his chest. The kind that didn't feel borrowed or stolen or conditional. It was a breath of certainty, of closure, of knowing that for once the system had worked. Not perfectly, but powerfully. The kind of breath you take when you know your child can finally sleep without fear. And so can you. For months, Ella refused to step outside alone. The yard felt haunted by fear, by memory, by the silence left after the screaming stopped. Travis never forced her. Healing, he knew, couldn't be scheduled. But one warm afternoon, without warning, she opened the back door carrying her old purple blanket. She walked barefoot onto the grass, the very lawn they once criticized, and sat down. No fear, no hesitation. She closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sun. She was taking it back. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. It bore the seal of Congress. Travis unfolded it slowly. He was being invited to testify at a federal hearing on HOA reform. His case had sparked a national outcry, and lawmakers were ready to listen. He read the letter again, then looked out the window. Ella was on the driveway, drawing with chalk. A big red heart bloomed across the pavement, full of stars and smiling stick figures. She looked peaceful. He stepped outside. "That's beautiful," he said. "It's for everyone," she replied, not looking up. "Even people who messed up." He smiled, crouched beside her. "I got a letter from the people who write the real rules." "Are you going to go?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, for you. For other kids, too." She picked up a yellow chalk and drew rays around the heart like a sun. "We're going to make this world safer, sweetheart," he whispered. "I promise." She didn't say anything, just reached out, squeezed his hand once, then let go. And that was enough.